Welcome back to Combined Alien and Horror, where hidden truths and untold stories come to light. Today we dive into The Desert is a Promise and a Threat. At first glance, it offers only sand and wind, a landscape that will not answer your questions. But listen closely and you can hear the hum. Not the wind itself, but something threaded beneath it. It is the kind of sound that begins as a thought and becomes a conviction. It is where the story of a man named Bob Lazar begins, and where the world he touched refuses to let him go. He did not set out to be a legend. He was a tinkerer, a man who loved the feel of wires and the math of engines. He liked things that burned hot and moved fast. He was born into ordinary life and drifted toward machines like a moth to a small, impossible flame. Then one day, he said he was invited into a place that had no right to exist, a secret base carved into the belly of a mountain, where the rules of science were, apparently, negotiable. When he spoke in shadow on a Las Vegas evening, people leaned forward because his voice sounded like someone telling you something you were not supposed to know. He used technical words and spoke with a calmness that suggested he'd thought about this in the quiet hours. He described hangars that were part of the rock, doors that opened like the throat of the earth, and a craft that refused to obey gravity the way we understand it. He told of Element 115, of a small reactor the size of a basketball, and of amplifiers that shaped the world around them. Skeptics found holes, transcripts missing, diplomas that could not be found, jobs that appeared and vanished in the paperwork. But the ambiguity only thickened the plot. Imagine a life where your past can be erased by someone with a motive. Imagine a man whose credentials fade like a photograph exposed to light. That erasure, believers claimed, was the smoking gun. Critics said it was a fabrication. Both interpretations fed the story, making it more fascinating with every contradiction. He spoke of the sport model, a saucer that shimmered as if it wished to be both there and not there. He spoke of interiors scaled for beings not built like us, low ceilings, small chairs, and of a reactor column thrusting from floor to ceiling like the spine of the ship. The propulsion was stranger still, 3 amplifiers arranged in a triangle beneath the hull, generating a distortion in the fabric of space so the craft fell through a gap in reality instead of traveling through the air. It was elegant, improbable, and terrifying in its implications. Lazar said the machine made no noise when it moved, only a deep, distant vibration, like the memory of a thunderclap. He said tests were quiet affairs, midweek at night, when the desert reclaims its secrets, and the few who watch are vulnerable to the long distance between truth and safety. He and a handful of friends sat on dirt roads with camcorders in hand and recorded tiny lights that moved with the confidence of something unburdened by inertia. The lights vanished like punctuation marks. That footage became a private proof among a small group and public fodder for a world that could not decide whether to mock or worship. Then came the warnings, men in the dark who did not introduce themselves. Vehicles that seemed to appear from nowhere, seized film and questions asked in rooms that smelled of coffee and authority. You begin to get the picture. Speak and they will come for your name. Stay silent and the silence becomes its own punishment. He chose a third path. He stepped forward. He told the truth as he saw it, and the desert, for a moment, listened. The fallout was not cinematic. It was quieter and worse. Reputation shredded by investigation, snatches of legal trouble that fed the rumor mills, and a new life made of modest things. A scientific supply shop, a bench, a few loyal customers who wanted to believe. He did not leverage his fame. He did not build a brand. He kept diagrams in a drawer and explained the physics to those who would listen without spectacle. That restraint was either dignity or missed opportunity, depending on which side of the conversation you stood. And what of the physics he described?
Element 115 sat like a ghost in the periodic ledger until scientists birthed a version of it decades later, fleeting, unstable, disappearing in whispers of decay. Lazar said the isotope he saw did not behave like that. He insisted it was stable, which is the sort of assertion that makes competent physicists grind their teeth. Yet the idea that an element could be the key to warping space-time tapped a nerve deeper than academic skepticism. It made inventors tinker late into the night and gave fringe theorists a scaffolding to hang their own equations on. Consider the mechanics for a moment. A reactor that creates a controlled curvature of space-time, waveguides that direct gravitational flux into amplifiers, and a craft that falls through space toward where the field has been made favorable. If this were real, it would invert everything the world runs on. Energy industries would be obsolete, travel would be redefined. The terrifying corollary is that such knowledge in the wrong hands would be devastating. That thought alone explains why so many hands might prefer secrecy. The government's response was not a grand reveal. It was paperwork, denials, and the steady machinery of institutions designed to minimize panic and maximize control. But the world shifted. Military pilots began to publish testimony. Videos surfaced of incomprehensible maneuvers hundreds of miles away and years later. Programs were quietly funded. The narrative changed from ridicule to cautious inquiry. UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, became a phrase used by people in suits who once would have sneered.
The line between dismissed fringe and official concern blurred in a way that made the entire saga feel less like folklore and more like an unfinished report. The human cost, though, is the part that never gets the cinematic treatment. Consider the way a life narrows when every phone call is suspect and every stranger could be an agent of consequence. Imagine being forced into a quieter existence, not because you've done wrong, but because the world cannot tolerate what you revealed. He described blacked-out windows, late-night helicopters, the small terror of being watched when you step outside. The anxiety was not just about being believed or not. It was about being safe enough to sleep. And yet, he never asked for fame. He never sold his story for spectacle. There is a particular dignity in refusing to monetize wonder. There is also a stubbornness that looks a lot like remorse. In interviews years later, his voice had the wear of a man who had traded anonymity for the weight of knowledge. He never flirted with new claims. He did not inflate his story for mass appeal. He simply repeated the same contours of his memory: the hangars, the sport model, the 3 amplifiers, like someone rehearsing a prayer he feared might be forgotten. For believers, those repetitions were proof of a consistent witness. For doubters, they were the hallmark of a practiced narrative. Both readings enrich the drama. Both are necessary to the point where the truth sits like a third thing between them, neither entirely contained by credulity nor entirely swallowed by doubt. What makes this story contagious is its suggestion that a door had been opened and quickly bolted. What if for a brief and dangerous period, humans had brushed against knowledge centuries beyond our time and then stepped back? What if something built elsewhere had been coaxed into human hands and then hidden in hangars carved into a mountain? Think about the moral arithmetic of withholding such a revolution. Does safety justify secrecy? Does the possibility of misuse outweigh the possibility of salvation? You can trace the echoes through culture. Documentaries that pull you close with grainy footage. Pilots' testimonials that read like military poetry.
policymakers who whisper about threats no one at the table seems to fully grasp. Even within scientific communities, curiosity kept knocking. Engineers and theorists who once dismissed fringe ideas now study anomalies with the sober curiosity of those who must not be dismissed. Perhaps it is the slow realization that the universe refuses to be neat, that our models are provisional, and that sometimes the strangest claims force the sternest minds to reconsider. There are moments in this tale where the line between truth and legend blurs so completely that it no longer matters which side you pick. The story becomes a mirror reflecting our hunger for secrets, for revelation, for drama. We want either proof of cosmic companionship or the thrill of being lied to by powerful institutions. The Lazar tale offers both. It is a Rorschach test for the collective imagination. But let us not forget the human detail, the small things that refuse to comply with heroics, the way a man opens a shop after the shouting fades, measuring powders, answering calls about lab glassware, the way a life becomes ordinary in rebellion against the extraordinary. There is poignance in that. A life lived with the shadow of a memory that will never be fully believed, and the strange courage required to live on anyway. In the years that followed, new evidence surfaced in fragments, leaked programs, grainy naval footage, a public conversation that had once been forbidden. Each time, Lazar's name flickered into view like a distant star. He was not an oracle. He was not the whole story. He was a starting point for a conversation about secrecy, power, and the cost of knowledge. The question that never leaves you is simple and terrible. If what he described is true, then who decides what humanity gets to know? Think about that as you look up at the sky. Not the glow of stadium lights, but the thin smear of stars, where distances are measured in impossible numbers. Somewhere beyond, perhaps, are engines we cannot conceive and minds that see reality differently. And perhaps hidden in the desert's heart, there is still a hangar whose doors are closed to the public. Maybe it is glass and steel and gravity amplifiers. Maybe it is empty. Maybe it holds relics of choices made by people who decided to protect or to hide. Stories like this survive because they are not tidy. They are messy, full of holes and hard edges that invite you to press your ear to them and listen. They are built from the soft details of memory and the hard facts of machines. They are about men who wanted to turn on lights and could not. They are about power that prefers the sober certainty of control to the messy moral calculus of revelation. So where does the tale end? It does not end. It folds back on itself, gives you a glimpse, and then draws the curtain. The final image is not a resolution, but a hinge. A man standing beneath a wide sky, an outline of a shop behind him, and a drawer of diagrams inside. He looks up, perhaps remembering, perhaps imagining, and you hear the desert whisper again. This is a story that prefers to breathe in silence. It is a confession, a challenge, and a warning stitched into one. It asks you to keep looking up, and then questions why you would want to know what might be watching back.
When you drift to sleep tonight, let the image linger. A hangar hidden in the rock, 3 amplifiers humming like the throb of a tired planet, and a man who could not help but speak. The last thing he ever said in public might be less about proof and more about duty. Don't stop asking questions. If you obey that instruction, you'll find yourself returning to this story like an old wound or a beloved song. You'll wonder what else is buried in the silence and who chose to bury it. And you'll be left with a cliff's edge feeling that the greatest truths are sometimes the ones we are not permitted to have. The desert keeps its secrets. But secrets have a way of bleeding into light. They enter the blood of those who look closely and never return to ordinary sleep. They become a low, persistent hum that you can hear if you listen in the still hours between midnight and dawn. And sometimes, out there in the dark, a small light will appear. It will move with a confidence that makes no sense, and for a terrible, beautiful moment, you will understand why someone would choose to tell the world. Because some truths are heavier than a man can carry alone. Outside the spectacle, the human toll quietly accumulates. Families carry the strain of sudden attention. Friendships fray under suspicion. Careers are rerouted by phone calls that never explain themselves. Men and women who once worked inside clean rooms and hangars learn to walk lighter, to speak in fragments, to treat memory like contraband. They keep diagrams in locked drawers and teach their children to ask the right questions in the right tone, because curiosity can be dangerous when paired with knowledge. Consider the moral burden of the knowledge itself. If the devices Lazar described can bend space-time, then the choice to protect or to disclose becomes a decision about the future of civilization. Lock it away, and you preserve a precarious balance, for now. Reveal it, and you risk unleashing forces no political body is prepared to steward. Who sits on that committee? What biases do they bring? What favors and fears determine their verdict? The thought that a small group controls a technology that could erase scarcity, alter warfare, and remap civilization is enough to make even principled people choose silence. And you, listening in the dark, are complicit in the curiosity. You lean forward because you want to know. You want to belong to a universe that is less ordinary. The danger is not merely in what is hidden, but in how eager we are to pry. In the hunger for revelation, there is a leverage that can be exploited, a way for power to ration truth as if it were a commodity. So we end where the desert returns to silence. A sealed hangar, the faint throb of something that might be a machine or might be memory, and a man who chose to speak. The last line is not closure, but an invitation. A cliff hung by a single question. Will we keep asking, or will we accept the silence? Or complacent?